Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Matt Davies-Adams. Today, the biggest news of the year. Chelsea and Enzo Maresca have parted ways with immediate effect. Why has it all come to a head? Let's find out. Joining me to discuss Maresca and more, we have our football correspondent David Ornstein, Chelsea correspondent Simon Johnson, and Mark Critchley is on board too. So, Chelsea take on Manchester City on Sunday in a match now dripping with narrative. David, 2 weeks on from your reporting that City were considering Maresca as a possible Pep successor, he's parted company with Chelsea. How did we get here?
Well, where to begin, Matt? I think you can trace this back to maybe the first season of Enzo Maresca's reign at Chelsea, because there were some comments in news conferences that, whether you like it or not, I don't think went down too well with the hierarchy at Stamford Bridge. People have described it as sort of going off script, which to some may be a concern in itself. Why is there a script? But I think at every club, there's a kind of messaging that they like to adhere to. And there were some signs, perhaps, in the earlier days. However, it was a successful season with the Conference League triumph, with qualification for this season's Champions League, with the Club World Cup success. And many I speak to around football think, understandably perhaps, that emboldened Enzo Maresca to be a bit more forthright in his comments and his conduct as Chelsea head coach going forward. We saw him quite publicly say that he wanted to sign another centre-half after Levi Colwill suffered his serious injury, and the club came back quite strongly saying that that wasn't on the agenda and that he needed to rely upon internal resources. As we went from summer into autumn, there was the hiring of George Mendes, the so-called super agent by Maresca. Many interpreted that legitimately as wanting to add assistance to further your career. But in what way? A new contract? A move to another club? Who knows? That was Enzo Maresca's decision. Fast forward to the 13th of December, and Enzo Maresca comes into his news conference after beating Everton, which followed a winless run, I think, of 4 games, including a bruising defeat from the jaws of victory away at Atalanta in the Champions League, and talks about it being the worst 48 hours preceding the Everton game of his Chelsea career to date, and that many people didn't support him, us, but he didn't elaborate. And then, I reported that Enzo Maresca is high among the candidates that Manchester City are considering if and when there is a managerial change. Obviously, there's no vacancy at the moment because Pep Guardiola is under contract until 2027. But there is a feeling within the game, I would say more than ever, that this could well be his last season, but we don't know that for sure. And they are right, Manchester City, to be doing their due diligence. That followed Pep Guardiola actually taking to his news conference and describing Enzo Maresca as one of the best coaches in the world, which maybe took some people by surprise at the timing and the nature of those comments, but he was only answering a question. It all then unravels with his departure. Some saying he resigned, others saying it was a sacking, more saying it was mutual, and we don't know the exact ins and outs just yet. Maybe that will develop in the coming days. And also the severance terms of his departure, how soon he can get back into work, etc. We don't know exactly right now. And in and amongst all of that shock to some people, but maybe not to others, we reported and revealed on The Athletic that Maresca had informed Chelsea twice in late October and then again in mid-December that he had been in discussions with people associated to Manchester City about his potential candidacy if and when a vacancy arises at the City of Manchester Stadium at the Etihad. Now, that requirement to inform his employers of any approaches from other clubs, any conversations with them, was per his contract. He was obliged to do that. His version of events and that of his camp is that he told Chelsea about any approaches, but he was happy under contract until the summer of 2029, I believe, with an option to extend by 12 months, that he was even open to signing a new and improved contract. Chelsea's version will be that he shouldn't be having that dialogue, and the timings of it correlate to a drop in results, and that it wasn't helpful, and it contributes to leading us to this point. The long and short of it is that Chelsea are now looking for their fourth permanent manager since the new ownership took over. We expect it to be Liam Rosenior. He's the clear favourite at this point, but there's so much more to this story than I've already gone through.
Simon, you and I were at the Bournemouth game. Enzo Maresca looked okay to me there when he was hopping around on the touchline like his shoes were on fire. Was it at that point when he ducked out of his post-match duties that you suspected that the writing was on the wall, or do you go back to the Everton game and the innocuous question about Malo Gusto that kind of kicked all this off publicly?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for the Malo Gusto question. I foolishly asked about Cole Palmer that day. I don't know why he scored. No, I would say I'd go back to the Everton press conference. Is the major red flag for clearly Maresca wanting to put out there that all was not well. It came as a surprise to pretty much everyone, including, from what I'm led to believe, people sort of quite close to Maresca, that he said this. And you don't say things like that, pointing fingers at perhaps issues between yourself and people at the club, unless there's clearly signs that you're not happy. And bear in mind that Maresca has done his utmost to say very little in every single press conference. It just made the fact that he came out and said that about, in an answer to such an innocuous question, even more of a wow, what's going on here? Now, Chelsea's plan, even up to sort of the Bournemouth game, was to stick to the 2-year review, not just of Maresca, but of just things in general that's going on at the club. But the hope was that they could move on and put it behind them. But it just became untenable. It was seen that him not doing the press conference was a sign of not being professional. I think Maresca himself, you speak to people close to him, that he wants to go away and consider his options. I just think we got to a point, Matt, where for both parties, it kind of made sense to part ways, even though Chelsea had hoped to see it out for the rest of the season. I think we just got to a point where it was best for everyone concerned to go their separate ways, especially as Chelsea still have ambitions in the 4 competitions they're in. And the downward momentum they were on under Maresca, with all the backdrop that David has just explained at great length, it just led, I think, the club also to think, well, is this actually going to get better or could it get worse?
Before we let you go then, David, you mentioned Liam Rosenior. He's clearly the front runner. It's not going to be a difficult negotiation with his current club. But how quickly would you expect him to be in post if indeed he is going to be Maresca's successor?
Yeah, just to be clear for our listeners, Liam Rosenior is the head coach of Strasbourg. They are part of the Blue Co group that owns Chelsea. And so essentially Chelsea's owners appointed Liam Rosenior to Strasbourg. They have a sporting director there in David Weir, who's very close to the Chelsea sporting directors, which are Paul Winstanley, Lawrence Stewart, Joe Shields, Sam Jewell, and they've also got Dave Fallows in there in terms of a scouting capacity. And so the collaboration is tight. They know Rosenior inside out. He knows them really well, increasingly so. I think they've spent a lot of time together. There's a lot of dialogue between them. There's been movement of players too. And crucially, Chelsea with this appointment believe that, firstly, it will be done within a matter of days. And secondly, it will be somebody who will fit directly into their style of play and their structure and setup. That points to Liam Rosenior, who they have a very high opinion of. There was a feeling long before we came to this that Rosenior will be a Chelsea head coach one day. It appears that it's going to come sooner rather than later. He hasn't been the only candidate in this process, but it has been a small number, a handful. He's within that. It will be very interesting to see how Bluco and Strasbourg look to backfill him and replace him if and when he departs. And yeah, that is the current expectation. the timings look like they won't work out for the Manchester City match on Sunday. So that looks like it will be an interim coaching setup. And then, very soon we would expect it to be Rosenior. And crucial here from Chelsea's perspective is that nothing is going to change, whether people like it or not, around their sporting structure in terms of the personnel, the hierarchy, Bluco, Todd Boehly, right at the top of ownership and down through the sporting directors and so on. Furthermore, that extends to the medical setup, independent of the head coach and making decisions for the good, they believe, of the players and their health, essentially. Don't forget the summer that they just went through. They didn't really have a break with the Club World Cup straight into the season, so they did have to manage things differently. I know there was a lot of anger when, say, Cole Palmer came off the pitch in the last two games directed at Maresca, and the word you seem to be getting from Maresca's end is that it wasn't his responsibility to be taking those players off. It was the guidelines from above, yet he was getting the criticism. So that maybe points towards some of the tensions as well. But then the style of play also is going to continue as it has been so far. The recruitment of young players. Again, there's been a lot of conjecture. Should they be signing more experienced players? But Chelsea believe experience comes through playing games, not necessarily your age. And so their path looks pretty much set in stone. I'm sure there can always be tweaks. And that's why they want and need a head coach that can, in their view, seamlessly slot into it. And it's where Liam Rosenior comes to the fore. So, that is the direction of travel. No confirmation at this point in time, but it will become a lot clearer in the days ahead. As Simon says, they want to be challenging for these trophies. They've got big ambitions at Stamford Bridge, and many people listening to this, Chelsea fans, might be dissatisfied with what's been happening, all the change on and off the pitch. But from what we can see, it would appear here to stay.
Right, Critch, you've been sat there patiently listening to David and Simon. Must be nice for you, this, Manchester United reporter looking at another club and going, wow, that looks pretty chaotic. What's your take on this whole Chelsea situation?
I think that's been a kind of staple of the past 20 years of Premier League history, is that even if things are going terribly at United at some point, it's usually worse at Chelsea. They feel like they're yin and yang in that sense, that there's usually chaos erupting at one club or the other at some point, and it's Chelsea this week. It could be United next, given the nature of this. I feel that the last time that I was on this podcast was pre the Everton game, and you asked me about Chelsea, and we were talking about the defeat against Atalanta. We were talking about the rotation policy. But also, I think the previous time I'd been on was a couple of weeks before. We were talking about them being title contenders, and Enzo Maresca was winning Manager of the Month. And so for things to have fallen apart as dramatically in such a short space of time, I think is even beyond precedent that's been set at Stamford Bridge in the past. I think if you look at the job Maresca's done, I think, sure, there are things that you could pick up on and say that he could have been better at. I think they've lost 15 points from winning positions this season, which is the most of any team in the league. But it's hard not to separate the job that he's done from the club that he works at. It's the fourth permanent manager that's going to have left Chelsea since Todd Boehly and Clarke came in. And I sometimes feel from the outside that there's almost an inherent contradiction between the manager's position at the club, who's going to need short-term results and is going to need to be able to justify their role and have success on the pitch, and then also at the same time this longer-term strategy that's carried out at executive level, that's about player trading, that's been quite successful at that, I think, as well, and has not, I wouldn't say manipulated, but has found ways through the rules to really sign some of the best young players and best young talents in the world. It hasn't quite come together on the pitch at the same time, though. And then at the same time, you have these suggestions of control over selection, as David mentioned there, about having to factor in medical advice, and that perhaps impinging on the coach's ability to choose and select players that he wants. I think it's an incredibly difficult club to manage. It basically has been, again, like I'm saying, for the last 20 years. It was during the Abramovich era. That hasn't changed under Todd Boehly and Clarke. And I don't see that it's going to change even after this, even if with this change of manager. I mean, I think it's actually an interesting question to ask. How much importance do Chelsea place in the manager? when Maresca came, his only senior managerial job had been at Leicester City in the Championship, and he did a brilliant job there. And I think he'll leave this role with his reputation enhanced, if anything. But you now look at them looking to replace him with somebody like Liam Rosenior, who has done a good job in Strasbourg, is obviously coming through from the same multi-club model. They know the coach, they rate him, but it's not the type of elite level name that we usually expect. And so I think that's an interesting element to it, as well as perhaps the way that Chelsea operates suggests that they're looking at players as being the drivers of success in the field rather than a coach. And that's something that any manager that goes into Chelsea, I think, perhaps has to try and understand and accept when they walk through the door.
Right then, under-21 coach Callum McFarlane is taking the pre-match press conference hours after we record. He's going to have to go one-on-one with Simon Johnson, which is a tough test for anybody, as I can attest to. He might therefore see the game as a bit of a break, Si. I mean, he's got lots of problems on his hands in terms of selections, right? Chiefly that he's not going to be able to call upon Moises Caicedo. I guess in one respect for McFarlane, it's a free hit. In the other, he's playing away at Manchester City.
Yeah, it's in terms of first games in senior management. You'd pick something else, wouldn't you? To be honest, as first press conferences, you'd pick something else as well. I do have great sympathy for him when he addresses the press at 1:00 on Friday afternoon, because it is a very difficult position for him to be in, to inevitably have to answer questions that perhaps should be answered by other people. All he can do, of course, I think the biggest thing he has to do is just try and ease the dressing room. I think he will have taken, I'm sure, sessions with certain players at various times. He is highly rated within the club, but there's a big task on here. You've got a group of players. Inevitably, whenever a manager goes, you're going to have some that are very upset, some indifferent, and some perhaps sort of thinking, "Oh, this could be my chance to play more of a role." I think it's key to get everyone together. I think perhaps Manchester City helps in that regard, in that you certainly can't be having a sulk about the situation when you go to the Etihad. And yes, they may have had a disappointing result last night, but you'd expect City to come out desperate to make amends and close the gap on Arsenal. Chelsea's record against Manchester City, as has already been mentioned, is pretty appalling since that Champions League win against them in the final in 2021. I've attended quite a few of these games at the Etihad, most memorably the 6-0 drubbing under Maurizio Sarri. I think there's a target for starters for Callum McFarlane to aim for, to avoid. But I think one of the biggest stories, and arguably the biggest story from this game, is going to be the noise coming from the away end. I do suspect that Chelsea fans will vote with their voices on what's been going on. And yes, whilst Maresca's behaviour will lead to some to sort of think, well, he had it coming and he sort of masterminded his own downfall to a degree, there are inevitably, and have been for some time, questions about how Chelsea's being run. Chelsea fans want success now. That's what they're used to. And you only have to go through the history books to see that when the previous owner, Roman Abramovich, sacked a manager, it usually ended in a trophy. But one of the reasons for that was because Chelsea would then go and hire another finished article as the head coach. And with all due respect to Liam Rosenior, he does not have the CV of the kind of managers Chelsea used to hire in the past. But yeah, this is not just a huge game for Chelsea, it's a huge month for Chelsea. 9 games in 4 competitions. It's the best thing they can do is move on as quickly as possible, and the first win can't come soon enough.
For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.